This is Bible School Radio, KDKR, Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, KYJC, Commerce, and KMWC, Bethany. On the web at kdkr.org and on all your devices with the Live 365 app. Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, what type of conversation should you be having with your spouse as you get closer to retirement? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, retirement is a huge change of seasons in a married couple's life, and there are very important conversations that should be priority ahead of time. Relationship expert and licensed therapist Gina Guddat is here to weigh in. Gina, it's so good to have you on the program today.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
You know, first, talk a little bit about what you do for couples as they approach retirement. I mean, it is a major life event and life change.
Yes, I do see a lot of couples approaching retirement, and I'm so happy when they come in for therapy. And I see so many people doing premarital counseling at the other side of the relationship, coming in to the beginning of a relationship, and I don't see them as often on the other side when they're sort of wrapping up their careers and they've launched their kids and they're empty nesters. But that's actually the beginning of one of the most exciting chapters. So when they come into my office, we really break down their vision for the next season of their life. And I have all kinds of worksheets that I can share with your audience and things that we work through. And they have assignments as well. About 6 months before retirement, I start giving them assignments.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you said that, because I've talked to so many people in that situation where they're going into retirement, and it's kind of one of these things where they'll look at me and they'll say, you know, I'm going to wait till I get retired, and then once I get retired, we'll start thinking about what I'm going to do next. And Gina, I've seen that just backfire in so many different ways of not being emotionally ready to retire.
No, and it's not a good idea to wait until after the fact. Because the plan, I think what it is well, I'll take a year off and just relax and play a lot of golf and sleep in. And, that's setting yourself up for a failure, actually, because it's not, going to be wise to fill all your days with recreational activities, because you'll quickly learn that you've lost your purpose. You could have lost your identity, and you suddenly are with your spouse 24/7. And that wasn't the case before. So right. We learn all kinds of things about our partner.
Well, what are some common concerns that couples that actually do take the right step? They go through we'll call it pre-retirement therapy when they're just about to approach retirement. I mean, what are some of the common concerns?
Well, I think that the most common concern that we work through actually has to do with the changing roles and responsibilities. Mm. And, whether we talked about it or it was part of our vows early on, we kind of settle into patterns. And whether they're traditional or non-traditional, or both people are working, or one person's a house manager of the home and family, it doesn't matter. We all have roles. And that can drastically change and should change. It should be evaluated upon retirement. So I have couples write down every possible thing that has to be done inside the house, outside the house, and a lot go unnoticed. Things like sending birthday cards to relatives and gifts, and, of course, mowing the lawn and car maintenance and the food prep and running errands and all of the things that have to happen in the yard, inside the house, etc. And I have them make a big list of these things and go through and just really talk about how much time and effort does each task take and who wants to sign up for each one. And what I found is nobody wants to sign up for cleaning toilets.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so, it might just be that, we have to alternate weeks on some things, or maybe even though I mowed the lawn for the last 30 years, maybe I want a landscaper, or maybe we want to hire a housekeeper, or maybe, my husband had to go on a business trip for a whole month, and I took over the lawn mowing in May, actually, and boy, do I appreciate him now.
Right.
So it's not the easiest thing, and so renegotiating what these roles and responsibilities are.
And I'll bet that when you go through this process, you'll start to figure, boy, there's things I could have been spending, if I had more time at that point in my life, that I should be spending more time doing some of these things. And now in this new season, you're going to have the time to do it.
Possibly. I do see that people have sort of accumulated a big list of house projects or things that they've been putting off, and then they don't really want to do those things.
Yeah,
they
that's
might
true.
have extra time, but maybe I don't want to remodel this anymore. Maybe I don't want to replace the kitchen or take on all those scrapbooks of photos from all the generations back. People really have a change of heart. What they thought they wanted to do, they don't. And I had women tell me, I'm not cooking another meal. I just don't want to do it. It's like, okay, well, how will we approach that?
So let's talk a little bit about loss of professional identity. Someone, say, has been a CEO for 20 plus years, getting close to the day where that authority and responsibility goes away. How do you advise for couples to adapt to that change?
That is probably the biggest cause of depression, actually, that I see in people. And it's similar to what I see in moms when they no longer need to nurture, or before grandchildren come along and their kids don't need them anymore. And I'm not saying there's not female CEOs and all of that also lose that corporate identity, but finding a purpose. And I guess repackaging your purpose so you don't go trying to manage your loved ones and take that managerial CEO role too far and start becoming controlling. But how to try to repackage that is really a challenge for people, and it will sometimes take the first few years to figure out who you really are, and that it's not as much about the doing as it is the being. Who are you as a being? And some people I will advise to go and be mentors. Some folks are really equipped to go and be on a board and pass on some of that expertise. Some people want to volunteer for nonprofits, which I think is fantastic, or even mentor in the community. They can mentor through their church, through a community center, through a community college. I've had people that are 75, 85 teaching courses at community colleges and, for continuing education, passing on some of the wisdom that they've learned, right? But they don't get the paycheck, they don't get the accolade, they don't get the promotions, those type of things we have in the workforce that show us, hey, you're doing well, this is your identity. That's stripped away.
I appreciate what you're doing, because I think the people, they look at it as, it's not that big of a deal, I'll figure it out. And I especially don't need to go to therapy for retirement. But what you're talking about, they are really big changes and really big shifts in emotion.
Mm-hmm. It leaves a big hole. And I would say there's some couples that do a better job along the journey of making sure that their money-making career isn't everything. Like I've seen couples that their vision statement is to be the light of their neighborhood. They're an open door. They're the gathering place for families. They have other identities. They're already giving back. Maybe they started to work on a project or a nonprofit earlier on. They do better. But if you were kind of like the workaholic, or you owned your own company, it's more of a struggle to figure out where to put that energy.
So what advice do you give for couples where one retires before the other does?
I actually like that. I think it actually works better if one person retires before the other because you can get some grounding and there starts to be a shuffling earlier on of what the roles and responsibilities are for. And I oftentimes see the man retire, and then he starts signing up for 2 dinners a week, and, the clothes are clean, and he starts kind of getting a gist of how he's going to fill his day. And then sometimes the female retires after that, and then she's got to figure out, well, how am I going to, what am I going to do now that he does everything? But the one before the other is actually, I think, a good step because there's so much grief and loss. People think it's a celebration, but there is quite a lot of grief and loss that comes from this. And so the person that's still working, whatever that source of work is, and work could be like, taking care of the grandchildren, being a nanny. There's all kinds of work, but the person that's still working can be a comfort to the adjustment period of the person who is now a little bit untethered, right?
Right.
And
right.
so if both people are flailing at the same time, it's not as helpful.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm talking to Gina Guddat, and I want to make sure that you have her website. It's ginaguddat.com, spelled GINAGUDDAT.com. And a lot of good information there. When you have a couple that they have just 2 totally different visions for what retirement looks like, how do you counsel them through that?
Well, I just had this actually happen just recently. I had a couple come in, and they came in because they were in a crisis. And the crisis was that there was a retirement party at the gentleman's work, and they were throwing a big party for him. And he got up and gave a speech, and he said in front of everyone that he is going to be on a big voyage and that he bought a big yacht, and he was going to sail across the sea and be on a year journey. And just it's something he'd always wanted to do is this marine life. And turns out his wife didn't know this. She was in shock. For one, she didn't know they bought a boat.
Oh my
For
gosh.
two, she didn't know if she was invited on the journey, if she was left behind. So that was, you can see in my office, there was a lot of tears, there was a lot of crisis, and the having some common visions, shared visions of what retirement will look like is so, so important. And I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't have, your own hobbies, and I think that's really important to differentiate because, too much time together, you can kind of get sick of each other, and then that causes bickering. But you definitely have to have a shared vision as far as, well, are we buying a vacation home? Like, what are the big purchases, like a boat? Or are we going to move? Are we moving to a different state? Are we going to a 55 and older community? Are we moving closer to our children? Those are big discussions, like I suggested, Bob, for 6 months ahead or longer. So you have the big kind of pieces figured out, and then the small things are easier to kind of sort out later.
So, Gina, tell me, how do financial concerns, how are those dealt with? Because you got a lot of fears. They come up when you know that even though, we're going to retire, we've always been wanting to retire, and the good emotions, but you got the fears as well. How do you deal with those financial concerns?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I prescribe a business meeting once a week for couples. And although I find some people balk at this, and I oftentimes hear, Gina, I've had so many meetings at my work. Why would I want more meetings when I retire?
Right.
But it's so important for couples to have business meetings once a week about finances. And they can actually include other things too, like, trip planning and all of that. But it's this naivety of turning a blind eye and just either assuming everything's taken care of or trusting the other partner with the finances and being too hands off that actually creates the fear. It creates fear and it creates anxiety, where when you open your accounts and you look on your computer and you look at the balance sheetments and you look at the investments, which I know it's scary right now with the economy, but it's better not to bury your head in the sand. And it can be a 15-minute check-in on a Sunday night or a Monday morning where you all are, both of you are sitting there and you're saying, hey, great, we're doing great, or oh, we need to talk to someone and reinvest these other stocks over here, or look, let's put this money over to a vacation, or in 3 years from now, let's pay for a cruise for the whole family. And having the couple on the same page, even down to how much do we want to spend on Christmas presents now. That's such a big fight in my office. How much do we spend on Christmas presents once we retire? Does anyone need a present anymore? It's just like, and those kind of things never, I don't believe, should be managed just by one of the people. I think both in the couple, and both partners should be involved.
It's so funny that you say that, because I know that Sherry and I, we don't have a lot of fights. But at Christmas, and how many Christmas presents our boys would get always, because we were both brought up differently as far as Christmas goes. Always, though, would bring up a fight.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and it does for everyone. It does for everyone, and there's a big shift of do we just go to the Secret Santa where everybody rotates, or is it going to just be gift cards, or are we going to, give an experience? These conversations, if they haven't come up already, sometimes it does, because you have so many grandkids by then you can't, just feasibly buy presents for everybody in the family. But at least at retirement, that is a discussion, and these business meetings are so key to couples. And I've had people say, well, we're going to see each other all day long. Why? We talk about this stuff in passing. No, a business meeting is you bring an agenda, and if you have questions, concerns, complaints, this is where you bring it to the business meeting. And sometimes it's things like, the garbage isn't getting taken out anymore. Who took the garbage out before? Now we're sleeping in, and maybe we should do it the night before. And these are things that you can kind of hold some of the important topics to these business meetings, because you have each other's undivided attention.
And I'm glad that you brought this up, as far as, one spouse kind of handles all the money and the other one doesn't want to really be involved. And you see that more than not. How do you get them what's the secret to getting them both totally engaged?
Ooh, I don't know if there's a secret. I think that I just make it a mandatory situation.
Right.
If they're seeing me, I don't allow someone to play naive and to play dumb, or to say I don't know anything about this, or I can't run the program, or everything's on auto pay, Gina. That we don't want to think about it. Well, I just really don't allow that, because like you brought up, there's fear. And fear is not acting in our best demeanor, right? Like fear, we know fear is not in our best demeanor, meaning that if you are having anxiety about something, you probably are just either lacking the faith and the knowledge to know that you're okay. And if you're being irresponsible and you're buying a Ferrari, every year, well, maybe there's a reason to have fear. But, like if you're on the same page, you keep each other accountable. And the fights that, come into my office are a lot of times they're money fights at all stages.
Right.
Beginning their marriage all the way through are money fights, right? And so one person wants to spend money on a big screen TV because, it's for the family. Another person wants to spend money on a vacation because it's a memory maker for the family. And do we need 3 sets of golf clubs? Well, I don't know. And all of these take negotiation and discussions, and you can't be a silent partner when it comes to finances.
Gina, how do you differentiate between a money problem and a communication problem? And of course, communication is just so key, all stages of marriage, but especially at retirement.
Well, yeah, communication over all topics, intimacy, finances, quality time, all the 5 love languages, basically everything that has to be communicated is a dynamic of how the couple has already established their relationship. And if they didn't have a good communication before retirement, it's not going to get any better. Retirement. I think my Communication 101 and 201 courses on my website are the biggest selling courses because so many couples struggle with that. And with money, there is this, I call it a hot topic. People are afraid to touch the topic because communication can so quickly turn to hurt feelings. It can turn to miscommunication as far as what the priorities are. You don't love me. If you love me, you would be spending money on this, not that. You don't love our family. You're a penny pincher. You're too extravagant. You're materialistic. I mean, these are judgment calls that are, it's name calling. We don't allow this, right? I mean, you can't make a judgment call like that where you're blaming someone with a name calling. So the communication around finances and intimacy, I think, are the 2 hardest things because these hot topics can be so hurtful. They can be so hurtful.
One of the bad situations when it comes to money is debt, and you see this every once in a while where one spouse is racking up a bunch of debt and the other spouse has no idea. How do you? And I can only imagine how that would be at the fireworks at retirement. Talk a little bit about how you walk through that with those clients.
Well, I had this morning. I'm in my office today with a couple, and he had been suspended from his job from having an accident, basically, that put one of the employees in jeopardy. But he was suspended, and because he was feeling bad about himself, I don't know that this was in his awareness, but unconsciously, he was feeling bad about himself for making this mistake and then getting suspended a week from his job. He went out and bought a very expensive truck without telling his wife. Now, mind you, they already have some debt from college kids. And today we had a session. It was really rough. I asked him to return the truck. We talked about the debt plan that they already had with the college funds for their kids. And, the problem was more than the debt. It was the lie and the secrecy around this, And he just went out and soothed his wounds of his own feelings of discomfort and the feelings that of his self-esteem being hurt by purchasing. It's like, what do we call it? Shopping therapy.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to deal with debt, and that is another reason for those business meetings, because sometimes you have to go into debt if your washer and your dryer, give up the ghost and, they're on the fritz or something. Nobody wants to buy new tires for their car. A lot of these things, hopefully you have emergency savings, but there are some decent reasons to go into debt, and those will get paid off. But these egregious purchases, it's going to cause, to answer your question, a huge breach in trust.
Yes.
Huge. And that's going to damage the relationship more than anything else, is losing trust in each other. And so, that debt is probably a poison, and the secret debt, that's a double. That's a double poison.
That is. Well, tell me this, Gina, how far in advance, if you know when you're going to retire, should you really start looking into couples therapy and start this process?
Well, I think 6 months ahead is a minimum. And if you can start planning like 3 to 5 years ahead, that would be even better. I have some worksheets that I give my clients, and one of them is called a life mapping goals for retirement. And they aren't the financial things that you are specializing in, which I appreciate so much, but these are the type of goals that talk about their health, getting all of their appointments in ahead of time. Do they need new glasses? Are they going to get going on an exercise program? Do we need to change any of our diet? Their life mappings on, what hobbies do we want to start pursuing, and if we need to go out now before we're retired and we have money and we need to buy a pottery wheel or something, something expensive we want to have in retirement that really fosters a hobby. I mean, you can see how those things would really benefit. Yeah, from figuring out ahead. I do a whole list of travel pursuits because all of us, I think, are probably going to end up with either a knee or a hip replacement. So some of those things, like my husband and I, we hiked at Machu Picchu, and we hiked all the way up to the top. Well, I don't want to do that at 85, but I'll do it at 65, right? And so some of these things you want to do a mapping on, just to see, okay, should we take a class together? Should we, do we want to learn another language? Because
Gina, I'm going to have to let you go. We're at the end of the program, but let me give out your website, GinaGuddat.com. GinaGuddat.com. Thank you, Gina, for coming on the program. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you have a question for me, we'll go to the website and send it in because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.